to vote? Are we ready to win? Yes.
This one is a total stiff. You can't have her as your president.
The consequences of him ever being president again are brutally serious. Brutally serious.
You're a vice president. We will make America great again. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?
We are not going back. We're not going back. We're not going back. No.
The United States of America has begun voting in its historical US presidential elections, and we here at News 9 Live are bringing you the latest on that front and understanding what it means for India. Hello and welcome. I'm Krishnakumar. It is the tightest ever contest between two candidates fighting to become the US president. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris neck to neck in national polls so far, and key battleground state surveys also predicting that the next US president is becoming increasingly challenging to understand who is going to be. Harris and Trump remain virtually tied across opinion polls. The winner will likely not be known for days after voting ends, so don't expect a resolution to this contest very soon. This pivotal election is said to have significant implications for the global economy, contributing to the recent correction in the Indian stock markets and stock markets across the world. Currently, Indian markets are experiencing a major downturn, reminiscent of the turbulence seen during the COVID crash. From their peak, Nifty and Sensex have each corrected by roughly 8%. The sell-off largely driven by foreign institutional investors who have withdrawn over 1 lakh crore rupees from the Indian market since the month of October began. However, domestic institutional buyers have stepped in, absorbing much of this sell-off by investing over 1 lakh crore rupees again during the same period. Experts suggest that if Harris wins, the US Federal Reserve may maintain an accommodative stance, potentially leading to a 25 basis point rate cut later this week on the 7th of November. And this could encourage the Reserve Bank of India to initiate monetary easing as well, which would be a positive development for our markets. On the other hand, a Trump victory could result in a hawkish policy aimed at keeping yields on the dollar high, likely prompting further selling from foreign investors. It's not good for the Indian market. It's not just about the markets. This election's outcome is set to have a huge impact on the world, and specifically speaking India as well. So many factors, so many ties that bind US and India. Let's try to understand that better. We have a very special set of guests joining us on this broadcast. We have Mr. Andrew Holland, CEO of Avendus Capital. Thank you, Andrew, for taking time out to be with us. We also have Mr. Jant Das Gupta, former ambassador to WTO. Joining us, we also Dr. Mishtu Tangbam, Director, Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies, joining us. Thank you, Dr. Manish, for taking time out to be with us. Let me quickly begin by asking Mr. Jant Das Gupta, former ambassador to WTO. This election, every US election is important, but this one, even as we speak, many Americans have already cast their vote. Your thoughts at this point of time?
Well, the election is going to be a very closely fought one, as predicted by all the opinion polls. But I think if you look at it from an Indian perspective, whosoever wins, I don't think the relationship is going to change very much or radically. Because if Kamala Harris takes over, it will be more or less a continuation of President Joe Biden's policies with some changes. And President Trump has already been president, and he gets along very well with our prime minister. They have a personal equation. So, of course, does President Biden. So I think, the usual differences of opinion will arise. But overall, I think on the economic front and on the political front, I don't think there would be any difference from what has been going on for the past, let's say, 8 years or so since 2016.
Okay. Fair enough. Stay with us. Let me take this quickly to Mr. Andrew Holland, CEO of Avendus Capital. Andrew, great joy, pleasure, privilege every single time you speak. Look at what's happening with the markets. All the talk is about the sentiment in the markets, sentiment in the Indian markets. Talk to us from the markets' perspective. There are two clear outcomes, and nobody is being able to call it even today, even as America is voting.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously opinion polls are opinion polls, so let's just see if there's no clear winner. But if it is prolonged, then we'll have to wait and see what the Federal Reserve does about that, because obviously that would cast a kind of a shadow over their thinking if they don't have a clear winner. I think if it's Kamala Harris, then nothing really changes. Probably means a weaker dollar, which isn't bad for emerging markets, going forward. But obviously, there might be worries over the fiscal deficit going ahead. I think if former President Trump wins, then it could be more, dollar strength, and that won't be good for emerging markets. And of course, all the tariffs that we could, that might be imposed, I think would have, quite a global impact, and particularly hurt emerging markets and Europe. So that could see slowing world growth, and that wouldn't be great for India in that scenario. Although obviously our domestic economies remain strong, so it could be seen as a bit of a safe haven. But that would be the best I could really kind of think about it under a Trump presidency.
Okay, that's a Trump presidency, but right now we're not sure if it's going to be a Trump presidency. If I were to pointedly ask you, for all the losses that the markets have sustained, in the recent past by foreign investors moving out of the India stock markets, what do you think can reverse this trend? Do you think this trend will reverse anytime soon? So many, retail investors watching us are wondering, will the results of the American election turn the tide for Indian markets? And if so, what would be that result?
See, if former President Trump gets in, it's probably more market, positive because of tax cuts and everything else that could happen under his leadership. So that would be bad for markets. But it's the tariffs which would impact, China and Europe and everywhere else, which I think the market would worry about. And of course, that's probably more dollar positive as well. So, that doesn't lead to flows to emerging markets. And of course, this week we'll see what the Chinese do. And I think that's really where the money flows are looking to see what happens, not only for the elections, but what also happens with China. And I think that, the money's ready to kind of go back into China if the economic policies and stimulus is starting to work, which it seems to be kind of at least steadying the ship. So now it just needs, an extra kind of push, and I think investors will start to look at China because of the cheap valuations compared to India. And of course, India, just looking outside of what's happening globally, there's no real catalyst for our market at the moment because, earnings have been poor. The government's not spending as much as I think we were hoping for, along with the private capex. So there's no real upturn in earnings I can see between now and the end of March.
Okay. Stay with us. Let me quickly take this across to Dr. Monish Tangbam, Director, Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. Dr. Monish Tangbam, the question I have to ask you is this: economy and the markets are one thing. Then it's, of course, the huge geopolitical importance of an event like this for the world and for India.
Yeah, of course. I think, it has huge geopolitical import. Whoever is going to win in this election, and as you rightly said, maybe we have to wait for a couple of days to really get into the results. Some of the strategic trends will of course continue. China will be a primary factor in how America looks at the world. The growing U.S.-China competition will be at the very heart of any administration that comes to power in Washington. There might be certain shifts in terms of how a Trump or a Kamala administration handles, the economics and the national security interlinkages between China and the United States, as we have already seen during the Biden administration in the form of tariffs and also in the form of the coming battle over semiconductors and electronic vehicle markets. I think that's going to play out in a major way. Trump has recently, often spoken about wanting partners, whether it is NATO or Taiwan, to sort of pay up more for their defense when it comes to their defense against Russia or against China. So I think in that case, we will have to see if Trump comes to power, whether there will be a replay of the 4 years of previous Trump administration, where there were a lot of uncertainties between America's close allies and partners. Will that replay itself, or will that come in a new flavor? With Kamala coming in, I think there will be much more continuity, although we are also going to see a lot more geopolitical play out in terms of non-military issues, like how the administration is going to deal with climate change and green transition spanning across the Indo-Pacific and the world, and America's role in that. And I think it's also important to see that there is a sense of diversification of supply chains, where a lot of countries, including the US, has been looking at a China plus strategy. How that is going to work out in the new administration. I think I agree with the four panelists in terms of saying that there is a calm confidence in New Delhi that no matter who comes to power, the strategic trends, the strategic convergence that India and US has built up over so many issues, multifaceted issues, whether it's bilateral or multilateral, they are going to continue in some way or the other. Yes, there will be some differences, which are differences of nuts and bolts in the relationship, which will depend on who comes to power.
Some states in the US have already begun voting, and some will begin voting in a short while from now as America votes in a historic election. What does it mean for India and the world? We have Andrew Holland, CEO of Avendus Capital, with us on this broadcast. Andrew, all scenarios and all possibilities aside, the larger realization at this stage seems to be, irrespective of who becomes the president, there will be that need to have India as a strategic partner, if not anything to counter China and the problems between the US and China that have been growing multifold over the course of the recent years. India will form a crucial part of America forward strategy, irrespective of who becomes the president. Do you think that realization will dawn upon the financial markets as well?
I think the financial markets have been playing this out, Krishna, for quite a long time now, haven't they? I mean, if you go back 3 months ago, and this is where the markets kind of is different from what you're talking about relationships. The markets were not liking anything to do with China. I mean, China was just out of anyone's radar, and all of a sudden it's back. So, it really depends on what the policies are, towards China. But that whole China plus one, or companies moving to India, that will continue. That won't move away. That's a trend that's going to continue. But it doesn't necessarily mean that foreign portfolio investors will see that as being a catalyst for them to move back into the Indian market, given where valuations are. And I keep kind of mentioning about the currency, because I think that plays an important part. If the dollar's strong, then obviously the rupee will be weakening, and that's not good for inflation. I think so. There's many moving parts here. Geopolitically, would a Trump win mean that the kind of likes of Iran and Israel and Hamas and Ukraine, Russia, would that kind of be settled a lot quicker? Which means that maybe defense stocks would be under pressure globally, because there's less need for people to arm themselves, or countries to arm themselves as much as they have been doing. So all of these factors will keep to play out and affect our markets, positively and negatively. But I would say, when I look at when the result's over, I'll look at only two things: the currency and the bond markets, where yields are, because that will tell me a good idea of where the markets are thinking and what we're going to be thinking. Because I could give you a case for interest rates to go higher in the US, not lower, if one of the candidates wins. So that's what the market's going to grapple with for the next week or so, in terms of the policies and the implications. But China plus one, I agree, will continue, but it might not be reflected in stock markets.
Okay. China plus one will continue, not necessarily will there be an impact on stock markets. Let me take this across to Jant Das Gupta, former ambassador to WTO. Jant Das Gupta, from so many other perspectives. When you look at American elections, especially if you're Indian, you're obviously thinking about all the Indian origin community in the US, and of course the Indians are going there on visas to work, Indian students going there, on visas to study. All of these are important factors, and the regime and who's going to be the president will have a strong impact on all of these things.
Well, Indians have been going to the US for many, many decades. And from 1965 onwards, I think there was a marked increase in the influx of Indians going as students. And subsequently, many of them stayed on. That is not going to change. The issue is about, further liberalization of the visa policy. For instance, how long will it take for a spouse who's going on an H-4 visa to get to work? That is the kind of minor tweaking of the policy which President Trump, if he comes back to power, may do. Or the Democrats may take a more lenient view of this kind of an issue. So there are these smaller issues which will be tweaked by whether it is Trump or Harris. They will do some minor adjustments. But by and large, I think Indians will continue to go to the US, work there, come back, invest their wealth partly in India, in other countries. So that is a very stable kind of a relationship. What we have to see is whether the US administration's stance against China hardens perceptibly, or it is more or less carried on an even keel. Because if it hardens, then India's opportunities for being, China plus one, and investments flowing in a greater measure to India for industries which have hitherto been dominated by China, that could be a kind of a scenario which will only time will tell. The third point, which I think one of the co-panelists has raised, is very important. Trump has been saying that he will have 10% flat tariffs for imports and 60% maximum tariffs. And the other point which he has raised is that if India has a tariff of, let's say, X% for a particular product, then the US will have the same tariff for Indian products going into the US. Now, this is totally against the WTO and multilateralism, which has been worked out since 1948. So, and of course, the past two administrations, and I don't blame President Trump for it, President Obama also was not very much in favor of giving the WTO greater strength or greater independence. So this is of a piece with the thinking since about 2009 onwards on multilateral trade issues. The US continues to remain a firm believer in bilateral ties as far as trade is concerned, but the kind of action which President Trump had taken to impose unilateral tariffs on aluminum and steel products on 7 countries, including India,
right.
If that continues, that could disrupt a lot of trade with India also, along with, of course, China would be the major sufferer.
Okay, fair enough. Dr. Mishtu Tangbam, tell us, if I were to ask you your hot take on, for all those watching as far as this elections are concerned, this is reminding us of what happened between George Bush and Al Gore back in the year 2001, how close it got and how many days it took for us to know the final results.
I think, without drawing any comparison with the 2000 election, definitely this is one of the closest elections in recent history. And I think, it's going to go down to the wire in the 7 key swing states. And that's exactly where the close margins are going to be. And those close margins are going to also determine the peaceful transfer of power in case Trump loses the election. And if he loses by a very close margin, there are a lot of question marks over, the issue of peaceful transfer of power. So I think this is one of the closest recent elections. And one of the things to remind the viewers about American election is that the American election is a national election, but technically it is a combination of state and local elections spread over the number of states in the United States, and every state has different ballot structures, and every state has different laws, and the counting of votes and the nature of the counting of votes in each and every state is going to determine how many days we have to wait, or will we get to know very early, like it happened in earlier times, or are we going to wait for a longer time, as you mentioned, like the one between Al Gore and Bush in 2000. Time will tell. Let's hope that this is much more peaceful than the one we have seen in 2020, ending with January 6, 2021. We hope that that doesn't repeat in American democracy again.
Yeah, we will leave it at that. Dr. Monish Tangbam, Director, Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. Thank you so much for taking time out to be with us. And of course, Mr. Jant Das Gupta, former ambassador to WTO. Thank you so much for being with us over here. And Mr. Andrew Holland, CEO of Avendus Capital. Always a pleasure talking to you and getting some wisdom as far as the stock markets are concerned. Thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on this broadcast. Very special broadcast. We here at News 9 Live are getting you live coverage, the latest coverage, even as America votes and decides who will be its next president. And with that, we're completely out of time here on the show. Thank you so much for watching. This is Krishnakumar signing off.